St. John the Philosopher here. There have always been enthusiastic but ignorant kids who want to change the world with their dumb opinions about how things should be run. And in the grown-up world has mostly tolerated this seemingly inevitable phase of human development with the general knowledge that it will be short-lived as their brains fully develop and reality sets in. But over the last couple of decades or two, this phase has gotten longer and more widespread, even producing adults in places of power and influence who don't seem to have a grasp on basic concepts of life. If you've ever encountered one of these leftists in the wild, you've probably come away wondering, where do they learn this garbage? Well, I hate to break it to you, but wherever it was, we paid for it. This is the third video in a series discussing what I think we need to do to win the culture war. For the previous video and a link to the entire playlist, check out the description below. And while you're there, why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Hey, it's free to you, but it really helps out the channel. Now, back to business. The primary target of any effort to manipulate culture to the radical left has always been young people. Little ones still exploring the world will believe almost anything they're told. Adolescents, though a bit cagier, don't have the knowledge and experience necessary to always distinguish the truth from a lie, let alone from a half-truth.
The Reebok pump, a cushion of air around the foot that literally allows you to defy the laws of gravity.
Naturally narcissistic young adults are easily swayed towards ideologies that reinforce their self-focus. And all of them are so enveloped in entertainment that they can't help but be influenced by it on a fundamental level. By the time they're actually paying attention to the CNNs and MSNBCs of the world, they've already spent a couple of decades steeped in a leftist narrative. So the often left-leaning news is just a means by which to frame current events with liberal confirmation bias. Even if they haven't been mobilized into the most rabid Marxist activists, they'll still sympathize with their causes and ideals, and they'll vote in politicians that hew further and further towards the radical revolutionaries that the Marxists want in office to bring about their socialist utopia. Therefore, if we want to halt the nation's slide towards self-destruction, we need to protect our children from leftist indoctrination by targeting all four of those related areas of cultural influence: schools, academia, entertainment, and media. Now, today's focus is on education. The rise of the hard left as a prominent force in American life and politics started in the classroom a long time ago. Now, things were more subtle back in my day, but in hindsight, I can clearly see the seeds being planted for what has become of public schools and the university system of today. Climate change fanaticism was on the rise. There was a growing mistrust of capitalism, and the self-esteem movement was helping to create the mentally unstable, entitled little crap weasels we're currently dealing with throughout society. I can't say for sure whether it was deliberate or if it was simply a natural consequence of the accumulation of leftists, coupled with liberals' inability to recognize their infiltration, as I discussed in the first video of this series, but the effects are undeniable. The entire education system from kindergarten to graduate school is overwhelmingly populated by far-left liberal activists who take full advantage of their positions to reshape society through the minds of their students. As an aside, shout out to all the good teachers out there just trying to do their job well. About half of my family and a good quarter of my friends are involved in education at one level or another, and I have no doubt that they're doing God's work. These aren't the people we're talking about when we say that education is a broken leftist indoctrination system. These are the people we need to rely on to hold down the fort while we do our part. Whether as parents or as voters or taxpayers, our job is to reform the current system for the long term, and in the meantime to protect the kids that have to deal with the system as it is in the short term. Towards the latter goal, there are three options. Clearly, the best way to make sure your student is taught about the subjects and values you desire is to say,
"Fine. I'll do it myself."
If nothing else good comes out of the pandemic school crisis, I do think many parents have been introduced to homeschooling and have discovered that it might not be as impossible as they previously thought. Certainly not like you have to start from scratch. There are plenty of good curricula available, and local homeschooling parents will often gather for group lessons and activities, so your student gets to spend time with other kids as well. You get the best of all worlds, just at the cost of taking on a full-time job that doesn't pay anything. A high price for sure, but with the benefit of hindsight, it's one I have a hard time not justifying having done when we had the chance. Obviously, homeschooling isn't a viable option for everyone, so there's also private schools. The obvious benefit is that while you don't have to perform the instruction yourself, you have quite a bit more control over your students' environment than you would with a public school. That said, don't be complacent here either. Let's not pretend as though leftist teachers and administrators don't find their way into private or even parochial schools. Of course, that brings us to good old-fashioned public schools.
You done messed up, AA Ron!
I truly understand if you're in a situation where neither homeschooling nor private education are an option. I even get it if you're fully satisfied with your particular school district. There are some really good ones out there. But what I don't get is the fire and forget way conservatives seem to engage with the system. We drop our kids off at the door and hope for the best. It seems like we're overly confident that the people in whom we trust the future of our most precious and delicate family members are acting in good faith. And that's not always the case. And when it's not, it can be really, really bad.
In Rockland County, California, a kindergarten teacher read a book called I Am Jazz to her students, an autobiographical picture book about a transgender child. One line in the book reads, "I have a girl brain, but a boy body." A parent reported to CBS News that after hearing the book, her child came home crying, confused and afraid that they could turn into the opposite sex without knowing it.
Worse yet are the conservative parents who see the constant exercise of having your worldview unrelentingly challenged, ostracized, and belittled as preparation for the real world. No, that's like dropping new recruits behind enemy lines with no weapons and expecting them to come out victorious and unscathed. We can't just send our children into a den of leftist wolves, expecting them not to be devoured like the little lambs they are. Instead, we need to be sheepdogs. We need conservatives barking at PTA meetings, nipping at the heels of preachy leftist teachers, and biting school boards when they want to cave to Marxist ideologues. Ask for lesson plans, read their assignments, understand what's being discussed in classrooms, even when your kid's answers to "what did you do in school today" is "nothing." When it comes to higher education, there are only a couple of things you can do to protect your kid. First, be very, very, very circumspect about choosing a college or university for your student. Avoid the party schools and obviously avoid the schools that have had very public instances of woke Marxist nonsense. There are resources now to help conservatives navigate the world of higher education, which I'll link in the description. Second, don't let your student choose a trash major. Besides the fact that it's a good way to ensure underemployment and semi-permanent college debt purgatory, they're often the departments where the worst indoctrination offenders make their homes. Also, starting college without a major or unsure of the major in which they're enrolled shouldn't really be an option either. It's a waste of time, money, effort, and sure to invite more ideological harm than good. Instead of any of that, consider starting off at something like St. Louis Christian College, where my wife works. It's a good place for young Christian kids to explore their independence in a place seeking to provide intellectual support for your values while accumulating transferable credits they can use at another school, where they can get the degree they need. I've also linked to the St. Louis Christian College website in the description. I know the president of the school and a couple of the instructors, and I can vouch for all of them. Now again, all of this is about doing our best to serve the kids who are going through the education system as it is today. But what about the future? Fighting the battles I described earlier in this video are a necessity, but not sustainable for all time. For the sake of future generations, we need to transform our educational institutions into something much more functional. School choice is a major component of reshaping K-12 education. It's extremely popular across most constituencies and would serve well to reduce the power of the incredibly leftist teachers unions and bring much-needed transparency to what's actually being taught in schools, as parents are drawn to be more involved with the responsibility of choosing where to put their education dollars. With parents, especially conservative ones, pushing the agenda instead of teachers' unions, the typical school curriculum will have more reading, writing, and arithmetic, and less intersectionality, socialism, and sexual confusion. As such, school choice would also have the small benefit of producing better educated students. People with a firm grasp on economics, civics, and history are less likely to be deceived into Marxist thinking. I am happy to report that we're seeing movement on this issue at the state level here in Missouri and elsewhere, like Florida and New Hampshire. Why it's taken the GOP this long to get moving on it, I'll never know, but be sure to call your representatives and tell them it's not just a fringe issue for you. We also need to encourage conservatives to become educators. We certainly don't need to do the impossible and flip the percentages. No one's asking for a complete takeover. We just need enough people in classrooms, administrative offices, school boards, dean's offices, and college presidencies to keep the uber leftists in check. Now keep in mind, this is a major undertaking, and it's going to take a long time. Up to now, I've kind of been combining my message about the K-12 and college education systems, but academia presents somewhat of a unique challenge. The sad reality of the world of higher education is that it's pretty much an economic bubble on par with the real estate crisis a few years ago, and it'll basically have to collapse before things can get better. But we can't just wait for it to happen. The longer this goes on, the worse it will be for everyone. College costs will continue to rise. Student loan debt will get bigger and bigger while degrees get more and more worthless. More of our young people will be indoctrinated and radicalized by their left-wing professors and the overwhelmingly Marxist culture that pervades many institutions. And the cries from leftist politicians for more money and more control will gain even more traction among the disillusioned victims of academia's failure, because government solutions are the only type they've been taught about. At this point, I'd say the collapse is inevitable. The thing about managing a collapse is that it has to collapse into something. And sitting a bunch of eggheads in a room to hash out the details is kind of how we got into this mess. So what we need to do is get government out of the way and let the market work its magic. I'm probably going to do an entirely separate video on how all this came to be, but one of the main reasons why college is so expensive is the artificial market pressures created by government subsidies. Right now, when a student takes out a subsidized loan for school, the banks are essentially guaranteed their repayment from the government, so they don't much care where the money goes after distribution, so long as they comply with government requirements. The government is basically their customer. Universities get their tuition money from those banks and are free to spend it on whatever they want, be it campus beautification, sports, or some new unnecessary dean's office, so long as, you guessed it, they comply with government requirements. And all along, ignorant students riding a wave of what feels like free money make one dumb decision after another about their education, only to find out later that they're on the hook for these loans with scant hope of getting the type of high-paying jobs they were promised in high school. Little do they know that they're just the instruments by which banks and universities funnel government money. By transitioning away from widely distributed public funding towards a privatized model, we reshape the consumer-provider relationship and force the parties involved to make decisions based on real-life factors. Without government guarantees, the bank's actuaries would get involved in order to determine the chances that the student they're financing would eventually be able to pay them back. Interest rates and maximum borrowing amounts will incentivize students and parents to be more realistic about majors and the cost effectiveness of each school. Colleges and universities will be evaluated on how well they guide their graduates into financial prosperity, forcing them to become more efficient overall and optimize their programs to actually do what they should already be doing, turning young people into well-rounded and productive members of society. Among other things, the useless progressive majors will become vanishingly rare, and the proportion of administrators to instructors, which has ballooned over the decades, will shrink to something more reasonable. And innovations yet to be tried will come out of the necessity of the increased competition. Of course, the added cultural benefit is that Marxist indoctrination can't thrive in that kind of environment. There's no time to talk about how everything bad in society is the fault of the patriarchy. Intersectional feminist philosophy won't pay the bills. Now, actually getting the ball rolling on that is something that will require significant political will that can only come out of an unrelenting and determined constituency pushing on their government. Make calls, write letters, tweet, share, rent a billboard if you have to, but let your representatives know that you want them to reform these institutions now and not continue kicking the can down the road. We can't afford to wait. Our future depends on it. Tell me what you think of this video. Do you have a story about leftism in education? Discuss in the comments. In the meantime, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more videos on religion, culture, and politics. That's all for today. Goodbye, God bless, and we'll see you in another video.